It's summertime and you know what that means. Swimsuits and alts and seasonal units and limited units. So we have our first new limited unit in a really long time, and it's Swimsuit Mami right here. Now we already know that there's going to be 2 other swimsuit units after this, maybe even more, who knows. But we're also going to get Swimsuit Madoka and Swimsuit Sayaka. But for now, we have Fiore Finale Mami Tomoe, who is a forest attacker, which means, and I said this in an earlier video when I was talking about Nemu, is that Nemu specifically needs a 5-star forest damage dealer to be good. So now Nemu is actually good because she now has actually someone that she can play with and that you can put on the team next to your awesome new Mami. So what does Mami actually do? Well, since she's an attacker, she's all about dealing damage. So let's see how she does that. And she has something very interesting and unique that other attackers don't really have to the same degree, where she is trying to build up momentum in a way and then keep that momentum, and the better you're doing at that, the more damage you're going to deal. So how does that momentum that I'm talking about actually work? So she has a magic system where she starts the battle at 0 magic and can get up to 5 magic. She's not going to consume this magic to power anything up, so if you have 5 magic, then that's as much magic as you're going to have. And you gain magic by having your turn start at all. So at turn start you gain 1 magic, and by using her battle skill, which also guarantees you 1 magic. However, even though there's nothing that you do to consume magic, there is a way of losing magic, which is that if you take damage, or rather if you take an attack, and there is currently no shield active on you, then you lose 1 magic. Now, shield is not barrier, and I want to point this out because people have also been translating it a bit wrong. If you go like to wikis or if you go to Google Sheets or whatever that talk about various characters, you might read about shield and barrier almost interchangeably, but they are 2 different effects. Barrier is the thing that actually absorbs damage that, for example, defenders use, like you have, for example, Sayaka, or you have your Sana, for example, throws a shield up. And I just said shield, even though it should be barrier. It throws a barrier up that then throws a barrier on the entire party. And this is the blue health bar that you see on top of your normal health bar. And that absorbs damage. Now, shield is something different. Shield is a buff that looks like any other buff that has a shield symbol on it. And what that buff does is it reduces the damage that you take for a certain number of hits. In this case, for example, you see right here, her skill applies a shield to self, which does 20% for 2 times. So if you take damage for the next 2 times, those 2 times you take damage, you take 20% less damage and you lose a stack of shield, until of course all the shield stacks are gone. So far we've seen that mostly on enemies, for example Sandbox, which applies shield to self, I think. Also, well, Pokésnacht might do that. But right now, as far as player characters are concerned, only 3-star Kokoro actually applies shield to the team. And now it's the second character that applies shield to the team is the new Swimsuit Mami, of course. So if you have a shield on you when you get attacked, you don't lose a magic stack on your Swimsuit Mami, but if you don't have one, then you lose 1 magic. That's how it goes. So you stack your magic up and up and up, and as you can see right here, there are many different effects that you can gain from this. The first one is if you have at least 1 magic, which you basically almost always will have, because as soon as your turn starts you get 1, with your skill you have another 1, and your skill also gives you shields. So a lot of things have to go wrong for you to somehow drop below 1 magic after that. That gives you 30% speed up. Pretty nice. 30% speed is quite a lot. Now, she doesn't actually have that much speed, like base-wise, so the 30% is not quite as powerful as it might sound, but it is pretty good. And then next up, if at 3 magic or higher, you gain another 30% damage dealt just across the board. Also pretty darn strong already. All of this is passive. And then if you manage to get all the way to 5 magic, which is not actually that difficult, you then also do 40% more damage on your special attack. So really strong buffs that we already see right here. But the self buffs don't end there. Look at the battle skill, it does something else. It doesn't just apply shield to self and also grants 1 magic. It also says if you're at 3 magic or higher, you do a bit of bonus damage, and you give yourself a special buff that also has a very special symbol that is called Midsummer Fireworks for 2 turns. Now what this buff does is it simply gives you more cool stuff, but only under certain conditions. So if you have 80% HP or higher, you gain a attack bonus, and the higher your HP is, the higher the bonus. And if you have maximum HP, then you gain up to 30% more attack. So already we can see if we have maximum magic and maximum HP with that buff, we gained 30% damage bonus, 40% special bonus, and then another 30% attack from Midsummer Fireworks. That's a lot of buffs. And then on top of all of that, if you have this buff on you and then use while you're still at 1 MP, 1 magic or higher, you then gain bonus MP for attack, battle skill, and special. And if you have 5 magic, then you gain 5 MP with all of these actions, which of course gives you even more MP to fire off more specials. And what does the special skill do? The special skill is a multi-hit similar to the battle skill, which hits the enemy multiple times. On top of all of that, once again, momentum. And this momentum is the magic right here. If you have 1 magic or higher, you deal additional instances of forest damage, and you can hit up to 5 additional times with this, meaning that the actual modifier that you get if you have 5 magic is actually really high, because you get 500% from the regular hits, plus an additional 100% if you're at 500. So that's a lot of damage right there that not many other characters can sort of match, on top of all of the crazy buffs that you have. Now, as I mentioned, with the sort of idea being momentum, is that what if you take damage? What if, for example, just before the boss gets into break, the boss just damages you, just below 80%? Like, especially if you're fighting against strong bosses, those bosses, if they hit you just once, are going to drop you below 80%. That's not good. So either you have a really strong defender, but that defender isn't going to help you once you do drop below 80%, or this is probably more going to be likely the case, you're going to put someone on your team who is a healer. So you're probably going to have a healer on your team, like a Kaede, for example, or Doppel-Ero. Doppel-Ero actually works really well with her, with the regeneration to also heal her up during her own turns, and you don't need to spend additional skill points for that. So you need to have some sort of way of recovering HP. Yeah, theoretically, if you have a defender, you can also use something like a Pluvia Madoka, although the heals, even with the EX that Pluvia has now, is not going to be strong enough to really do much in most situations. So probably you want to actually have a healer on the team if you have a Swimsuit Mami on your team to be your damage dealer. Now, yeah, theoretically, there's also other characters who can heal, like, for example, Madokami, but Madokami is also an attacker, and you shouldn't run 2 attackers on the same team, so you're probably not going to actually have that. So you need to have full HP, you also need to have full magic, which means that you need to keep using your battle skill, because whenever you use your battle skill, it gives you shield, and as long as you have shield, you then don't lose your magic stacks when you get hit. So you need to also spend additional skill points on your shield, just so you don't drop your magic points. So there's a little bit of a sort of a mind game almost that happens with, should I use skill now? Because if I do, I know I'm safe, but what if the enemy just doesn't attack me? Because if the boss just doesn't attack me, then I don't need to actually spend the skill points on the shield, right? And I can just keep my magic anyway, right? So you kind of need to figure out how you're actually going to play that. Knowledge of the boss and knowledge of the fight is going to go a long way, because every single boss actually uses the same attacks in the same order every single time. So if you know, for example, the boss next up is going to use an AoE ability, then you know you're going to have to use a shield to keep that damage buff up. Now, just some comparison with other damage dealers, and I just looked at what are the actual damage buffs that they give themselves, because there's a lot of ways that Mami has right here of increasing her own damage with these attack buffs and damage buffs and all this other stuff. And within this comparison, it turns out that basically only Madokami has more self buffs, because Madokami gets like 15% attack from her skill, 30% damage from her skill, 25% attack from her passive, 25% crit rate from her passive. She gains 40% crit damage during special. She gains, with her new EX Crystallis, 15% crit rate and another 25% crit damage. Absolutely insane. And also, what's actually kind of insane is there's actually another character who now, with the EX Crystallis, has about as many self buffs and about as strong as self buffs as Swimsuit Mami has, and that's Yachio, because Yachio's EX also gives her now 20% crit rate, so that's kind of cool. And I did just mention it, yes, EX Crystallis are now in the game, and specifically for Swimsuit Mami, I'm going to have to mention this now for every single sort of guide video that I do. For Swimsuit Mami, the EX Crystallis does 25% forest damage to herself, although to be fair, the entirety that it does is it gives you, if you're at 5 magic, 25% forest damage, which hopefully you're going to be all the time if you're playing right. And it also says if you use a basic attack, it gives you a single shield for 10%, which actually makes it easier to keep the magic going without losing it. So if you have the EX, you want to use it on Swimsuit Mami. So Swimsuit Mami is one of those characters where you are going to use your EX in one of your slots, because even if you don't need to make use of the shield you gain from your basic attack now, you're gonna actually want to make use of the increased force damage dealt, 25%. That's pretty strong. You're gonna use that. So now what else is there? Well, she has the support ability as well, but this one is not that important because all it does is increase damage dealt when targeting elemental weakness by 25%, which is the same that Aurico does, and most people have Aurico. Like if you have Swimsuit Mami, you probably also have Aurico on your account, and Aurico does the same, so you're probably gonna use Aurico instead, because she also has a secondary effect that can buff damage even more in some fights. And while Aurico does that, Swimsuit Mami on the other hand only has the secondary effect of on battle skill use applies shield to self for 10% for one time, which is not very much. It's actually quite little. There might be some cases where this might be helpful, right? But for the most part, not really that important to have that, okay? And then one other thing, so I don't forget it, the Ascensions, of course. Once again, they all have, every attacker has the same Ascensions on Ascension 1 and Ascension 4, but Ascension 2 is always different. In this case, her Ascension 2 does the following: at battle start grants 3 magic and applies shield to self for 20% 2 times. And while shield is active, also increases MP recovery rate by 15%. Now this is not quite as strong as I initially thought it would be, but it does still give you quite a lot of really nice stuff to work out with. So with the shield that you gain immediately at the start of the battle, you start at 3 magic, then it's your turn, you have 4 magic now. The fact is, with 2 shields, you're probably not gonna actually lose that magic before it's your turn. And then even when it's your turn, you can decide to simply use a normal attack, right? Especially if you have the EX, which gives you an additional shield. So because of that, it is now a lot less likely that you're actually going to lose your magic rather early in the fight. That said, you don't need your magic early in the fight, and that's kind of the counter argument, is that you only really need your magic to be up when the boss gets broken. So what do you need your magic for before the boss gets broken? Specifically at the beginning of a fight, that's really far away from the boss being broken, so it doesn't really actually do that much to have a safer start when the thing that really matters is the end. And so far I've played her on scroll attack for a while. Basically all the time I'm going to enter the boss break with my Mami having either 4 or 5 magic stacks, so it's not gonna make much of a difference at all. And when I enter the boss fight with 4 magic stacks on the boss breaking, that's usually when just before the boss enters break, I run out of skill points, I don't use a skill on my Mami, and then the boss does one last attack before it gets broken and I lose a magic stack. That can happen. But this A2 doesn't do anything about that, because that happens so late in the fight that all of the effect from this initial shield and magic is just gone at that point. So that doesn't really matter. But you gain 15% MP recovery rate while the shield is active. And that is actually kind of interesting, because depending on the kind of team that you run, this can give you another special per turn. You do actually have a lot of ways of getting a lot of magic, a lot of MP. Because for example, you gain bonus MP if you're at 5 magic, and then you take any action like special or skill. So for example, the boss enters break and you use your special, and after that special, usually you end at 5 MP, but because of your Midsummer Fireworks buff, which gives you bonus MP if you're at high magic, which hopefully you're going to be at 5 magic, that means you then get an additional plus 5 MP, so you end at 10 MP. Then you use a battle skill, which gives you 30 MP, on top of the 5 MP that you're then also getting from your another Midsummer Fireworks, so you're already at 45. That's quite a lot. Now let's say, for example, since you need a healer on the team, you also have a Kaede, and the Kaede uses skill and special to give you additional MP generation. And let's say you also have a Mami on the team, like a regular Mami on the team, who with her special gives even more MP generation. And with all of those different effects, it's actually possible to get a 1-turn rotation where you use special, skill, special, skill, special, skill, etc. But you need all of that to basically come together. Like, it's a lot of effort to do that, but you can just barely get there. At least until Kaede doesn't have the MP anymore to use her special again. but the fact that you can do that with this new A2, Ascension 2 that you can get, does actually give it quite a lot of power in certain cases, but really only in certain cases. Aside from that, the other Ascensions are of course the standard ones that all attackers get, so nothing too interesting there. Now as far as builds go, as I mentioned earlier, you want to have Nemu probably, because now she actually has something to do. Now she has a forest attacker that she can support. If you don't have Nemu, it's totally fine. You can either use a second buffer or you can use a Ren, for example. It's also going to be really good. Nemu isn't that much better than any of the other choices, but she's still better if you have Swimsuit Mami in this case. Of course, for supports, you can pick whatever you think makes most sense for your fight, and since you're probably going to use her in a fight where the enemy is forest weak, you're going to use Oriko in most cases, but theoretically, you could also use Momoko, for example, because Momoko makes your special even more powerful, and a lot of power comes from your special, just to mention that. And of course, regular Mami also does extremely well, because regular Mami is just one of the best buffers in the game when it comes to increasing damage. But of course, a Tsuruno could also do really good at increasing your damage. And then of course, since you need something to keep your HP up, a healer is going to be good. And like I mentioned earlier, with the MP bonuses, Kaide is going to be really good. And even though I didn't put it into my calculations earlier, if you have a Pluvia, you can also use a Pluvia as your breaker in this case. This score attack isn't light weak, so I'm using a Rena instead. But if you use a Pluvia, you can then really try as much as you can with your Pluvia, Kaide, with your regular Mami special MP generation to really try and get as many specials as possible out of your Swimsuit Mami to really increase the damage by a lot. And this is going to be the big X factor, because if you can get a lot of specials out during the enemy break, this Swimsuit Mami is going to be extremely good. How good exactly compared to other attackers? Well, now that the EX crystals have been released, the balancing between the different attackers has been completely thrown off again. As in, we don't really know exactly how strong all of them are going to be. Yachiyo just got insane, because 20% crit rate that she just gained from her EX is kind of strong, especially because on top of that, for your attackers, every single attacker is now going to get crit rate and crit damage substats, like not main stats, but substats at least on all of their equipment. So Yachiyo can gain like another 15% crit rate and like another 30% crit damage just from substats, not even the main stats. So now Yachiyo is going to be absolutely insane, because crit damage actually does a much better job of increasing your damage without hitting diminishing returns, other than normal damage. Like for example, if you just stack attack buffs, the more attack buffs you have, the less each attack buff is worth. And the more damage percent buff you have, the less damage percent buffs are worth. But crit damage is entirely separate from all of that. Like it's separate from any attack up, it's separate from any damage increase buff that you can imagine. It is separate from this entire ecosystem and is completely its own thing. So if you have a crap ton of damage up, a crap ton of attack up, and you just don't know how else to increase your damage, then suddenly crit comes in and is the X factor to give you a huge damage boost. And Yachiyo is now better positioned than most characters to make use of that, with her EX giving her so much more crit rate. You can get insane amount of crit rate without having it thrown on the field, and that's kind of strong. And on top of all of that, Madokami also has an insane amount of crit rate and crit damage now, so Madokami also just got way stronger. Homu might not be the best attacker in the game anymore, and that's kind of awesome. For me personally, I really like Homu, so I'm gonna make my Homu the best she can be. Homu's EX is not good at all, and I'm not actually gonna use it. Like my Homu I think has it. I'm not even gonna equip it. It's not that good. So yeah, it's kind of hard now to figure out how the individual attackers work out, but I also need to mention that we've sort of moved away from comparing the attackers to each other anyway, because with Score Attack, for example, and with Chaos Mode, and with all of these high-end scenarios we find ourselves in, we find out that the damage difference between hitting weakness and not hitting weak element is so strong that you're basically always going to use the attacker that actually hits the enemy's weak element. The only difference is that maybe if the enemy, maybe if that attacker has like a Ascension 4 and another attacker only has like Ascension 1 or whatever, you probably might still be using the one that has Ascension 4, but even then maybe not. It's actually going to be somewhat different, somewhat difficult to judge that, but for the most part, you're going to use the attacker that is of the correct element to the boss. So comparing attackers to each other doesn't really matter that much. So because if the enemy is forest weak, I'm gonna use my Swimsuit Mami. My Homoda is absolutely incredibly busted, like one of the strongest Homodas that you currently see after this patch only being out for a single day. And I'm still gonna use Swimsuit Mami in score attack, even though this Homu is this insanely busted already after like just 1 day of farming. So that's kind of how balancing goes nowadays. But yeah, that was basically that. For portraits, of course, always just attack percent, like I don't need to keep mentioning that. But yeah, oh yeah, I should also mention Crystallis maybe. Even though I kind of said it during my Crystallis video, but for basically every single attacker, you want to use the attack percent right here, and then you want to use the elemental percent right here. I don't have it on legendary yet. And then for the slot 1, for the most part, you want to use your EX, not for Homoda, but for Swimsuit Mami, you want to use the EX Crystallis because it's really strong. But if you don't have it, then you might want to use the Crystallis that gives you increased damage against elemental weakness, which I don't have right now in my Homoda, sadly. And that's basically what your Crystallis setup is going to be. And for secondary effects, you want to get crit rate, you want to get crit damage. And then for your third one, you can either get flat attack or you can get speed, because speed can also be really nice. But theoretically, there's also some weird builds you can do where you get more HP or more defense or debuff resistance if there's a lot of debuffs coming at you. So that last slot is a bit variable, but at least like crit rate and crit damage is really nice because that is like the X factor of increasing your damage even further when nothing else works anymore. But yeah, that was that. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and I'll see you guys next time.